Simplify the following expression. 64x to the fourth plus 8x cubed minus 4x squared plus 16x, all divided by 8x. So really what we have here is four separate fractions. I'm going to break this up. 64x to the fourth divided by 8x plus 8x cubed divided by 8x minus 4x squared divided by 8x plus 16x divided by 8x. Every single term is divided by 8x. So now we can take each one of these individually and divide by 8x. 64 divided by 8 is 8. And x to the fourth divided by x, well, let's see what that looks like. X to the fourth divided by x is x times x times x times x times itself 4 times, x to the fourth, divided by x. X divided by x is 1, so those cancel. And what you're left with is x cubed. So x to the fourth divided by x is x cubed. Plus 8 divided by 8 is 1 times, and then we do the same thing with x cubed divided by x. So x cubed divided by x would be x times x times x divided by x. X divided by x is 1, so you're left with x times x, x squared. Minus 4 divided by 8. 4 can't really be divided by 8, but we can simplify 4/8 as 1/2. And then x squared divided by x. You may have noticed from these two examples before that when we divide by x, what we're doing, or really when we divide at all, what we're doing is subtracting the exponents. So x to the fourth minus x to the first, or x to the 4 minus 1, x cubed. So here we have x to the 3 minus 1, x squared. So now we have x squared minus 1, or just x, plus 16 divided by 8 is 2, and x divided by x is 1. So our answer is 8x cubed plus x squared minus 1/2 x plus 2, which is answer B. Simplify the following expression. 25x to the 6th, y to the 7th, z squared, divided by 5x to the 5th, y squared. I'm going to start by simplifying 25/5. 25 divided by 5 is 5. When you divide and you have the same bases, like x to the 6th and x to the 5th, then all we have to do is subtract the exponent. So it's 6 minus 5. And then same thing with y. So it's y to the 7th divided by y squared, or y to the 7 minus 2. And then finally we have z squared, which isn't being divided by anything in the denominator, so it just stays as z squared. So now when we simplify, we have 5x to the 6 minus 5 is 1, x to the first is just x, y to the 7 minus 2 is 5, z squared. So our answer is B. Triangle ABC is a right triangle, and angle ACB is 30 degrees. What is the measure of angle BAC? Well, the first thing I want to do is fill in this information, that angle ACB is 30. ACB is this angle right here, and it's 30 degrees. So I know 2 out of the 3 angles of my triangle. And I know that the 3 angles of a triangle add to be 180. So that means that this 90-degree angle plus this 30-degree angle plus the measure of angle BAC right here equals 180. The first thing I need to do is combine like terms. 90 plus 30 is 120, plus the measure of angle BAC is 180 degrees. To solve for the measure of angle BAC, we need to subtract 120 from both sides. 120 minus 120 is 0. Bring down the measure of angle BAC equals 180 minus 120 is 60. So that means the measure of angle BAC is 60 degrees. A line passes through points A, negative 318, and B, 5,2. What is the slope of the line? Well, there are a couple of different ways we can find slope. One would be to graph these 2 points on a coordinate plane and then count between the points the rise and the run. Because that's all that slope is, really. Slope is the change in your y values divided by the change in your x values. Or y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So this first point, this would be our first x and our first y. And then our second point here, B, would be our second x and our second y. And now that we've labeled, we just need to substitute. y2 is 2 minus y1 is 18 divided by x2 is 5 minus x1 is negative 3. And then we simplify. 2 minus 18 is negative 16 divided by 5 minus a negative 8. We can add the opposite, so that's just 8. And we can simplify that. Negative 16 divided by 8 is negative 2. So our slope is negative 2. Which of the following is a solution to the inequality 4x minus 12 is less than 4? First, we should solve for x in this inequality. So we're going to add 12 to both sides. Bring down our 4x. Minus 12 plus 12 is 0, so that cancels. Bring down our less than sign. And 4 plus 12 is 16. Then we need to divide both sides by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, times x is x, is less than 16 divided by 4 is 4. Keep in mind when solving inequalities that if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, you must flip the inequality symbol. In this case, we didn't have to, since we didn't divide both sides by a negative number. It's all about that negative. So now we can apply these answer choices. We want to find which one of these numbers is less than 4? Is 7 less than 4? No. Is 6 less than 4? No. Is 5 less than 4? No. What about 4? Is 4 less than 4? No. If this were a less than or equal to sign, if it said x is less than or equal to 4, then yes, 4 would be a solution because 4 is equal to 4. And it only has to be one, either less than or equal to. But in this case, it's not a less than or equal to sign. It's simply a less than sign, meaning that this number must be smaller than 4. So our answer is E. 3 is less than 4, where 3 is a smaller number than 4. If 2x squared equals negative 4x squared plus 216, what is the value of x? I'm going to start by rewriting this problem so I have a little more room to work with it. And if we're trying to solve for x, then we'll need to get all our x's together. So I'm going to add 4x squared to both sides so that way on the right-hand side, it'll cancel because I have a negative 4x squared and a positive 4x squared, and those are additive inverses. Now on the left-hand side, 2x squared plus 4x squared is 6x squared. Bring down the equal sign and bring down 216. So this is 6 times x squared. So to get rid of this 6, we do the opposite of multiplying, which is dividing. Divide both sides by 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1, and 1 times x squared is simply x squared. So those 6's cancel. And that equals, and now we can take 216 and divide it by 6. 6 does not go into 2, but it does go into 21. And 6 times 3 is 18. It goes in 3 times and we get 18. 21 minus 18 is 3. We bring down the 6. And 6 goes into 36 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. So when we subtract, we get a 0 remainder. So that means that 216 divided by 6 is 36. So now we know what x squared equals, but we still haven't found what x equals. So to get x alone, we need to do the opposite of squaring x. And the opposite of squaring is to square root. So we square root both sides. The square root of x squared is simply x. And the square root of 36 is 6. So that means that x is 6. Answer C. 3x squared y plus y divided by 2 minus 6x. If x equals 4 and y equals 10, what is the value of the expression? First, I'm going to take our expression and copy it. Next, we need to substitute these numbers we were given for their variables. So we're going to replace our x's with 4's. So we have 3, this is 3 times x squared, so it's 3 times 4 squared, times y, which is 10, plus y divided by 2, or 10 divided by 2, minus 6 times x, and we're replacing x with 4. To simplify this expression, we need to follow the order of operations. which some people know as PEMDAS. And in PEMDAS, we do parentheses first, which we don't have here, and then exponents next. We do have exponents, so that means the first thing we'll do to simplify is find what 4 squared is. So we bring down the 3 times 4 squared is 16 times 10 plus 10 divided by 2 minus 6 times 4. So that's all of our exponents. Next in PEMDAS is to do multiplication and division from left to right. So starting on the left-hand side, we'll start with multiplying 3 times 16. And we can work that off to the side. 16 times 3, 3 times 6 is 18, so write the 8, carry the 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. So 16 times 3 is 48. So we have 48 times 10 plus 10 divided by 2 minus 6 times 4. We need to continue working our multiplication and division from left to right. So we'll next multiply 48 times 10, which is 480 plus 10 divided by 2 minus 6 times 4. We'll move past the 480 plus, and we'll move right on to division. 480 plus 10 divided by 2 is 5, minus 6 times 4. We have one more multiplication operation to take care of, 6 times 4. So we have 480 plus 5 minus 6 times 4, which is 24. Now we need to go back and consult PEMDAS. We're finished with all our multiplication and division. So we're going to do now our addition and subtraction from left to right. So that means we start with adding 480 plus 5, which gives us 485 minus 24. And 485 minus 24, can work that off to the side. 5 minus 4 is 1, 8 minus 2 is 6, and we bring down the 4, so we get 461, which is answer choice B. The quantity y plus 10 squared minus 625 equals 0. Solve for y. The first thing we want to do is add 625 to both sides, because doing that is going to help us get y alone and thus solve for it. So we bring down our quantity y plus 10 squared. Negative 625 plus 625 is 0, so that just cancels out. And that equals 0 plus 625, which is 625. Well, then we want to get rid of this squared because our y is kind of locked in those parentheses. So to unlock them, we want to do the opposite of squaring, which is square rooting. So we square root both sides. And the square root and the square undo each other. They're the exact opposites of each other. So they cancel each other out, and we're just left with y plus 10 equals, and when I take the square root of 625, I get plus or minus 25. And that's because a positive 25 squared would give me 625, but also a negative 25 squared would give me 625. So we really have two answers there. So we write it with a plus or minus. And finally, to solve for y, we need to subtract 10 from both sides. So we have y plus 10 minus 10 is 0, so equals negative 10 plus or minus 25. We have two answers, and to find them, we just need to simplify. So we have y equals negative 10 plus 25, and y equals negative 10 minus 25. All I did was separate the plus or the minus into two separate expressions. Negative 10 plus 25 is 15, while negative 10 minus 25 is negative 35. So our solutions are that y is 15 or negative 35, which is answer D. Simplify the following expression. 16m to the 16th, y to the 4th, z to the 6th, divided by 8m to the 8th, y squared, z cubed, all raised to the 4th power. First, we want to simplify before we raise to the 4th power. So we're going to start with dividing 16 by 8, which is 2. Then m to the 16th divided by m to the 8th is m to the 16 minus 8. Since when you divide like bases, you subtract the exponents. Y to the 4th divided by y squared is y to the 4 minus 2. And z to the 6th divided by z cubed is z to the 6 minus 3. Now we need to simplify our exponents. So we have 2m to the 16 minus 8, 8, y to the 4 minus 2, 2, and z to the 6 minus 3, 3. We have to be very careful to not forget that all of this is supposed to be raised to the 4th power. So we're not done yet. Now we need to raise everything inside our parentheses to the 4th power. So we'll start with 2 to the 4th. Then we have m to the 8th raised to the 4th. We're raising a power to a power, so we must multiply our exponents. So m to the 8 times 4 is 32. Y to the 2 times 4 is 8. And z to the 3 times 4 is 12. Finally, we need to simplify 2 to the 4th. 2 to the 4th means to multiply 2 times itself 4 times. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So 2 times itself 4 times is 16. M to the 32nd, y to the 8th, z to the 12th. So our answer is answer choice D. If 2x equals 5x minus 30, what is the value of x? The first thing we want to do to solve for x is to get all of our x terms on the same side of the equal sign. We have 2x on the left side of the equal sign, and we have 5x on the right side of the equal sign. We have two options here. We can either subtract 2x from both sides, and that way we would get rid of 2x on the left side, or we can subtract 5x from both sides and get rid of 5x on the right side. I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. This is called the subtraction property of equality. Because I have the left side equal to the right side, then I could subtract the same thing from both sides, and they'll still be equal. 2x minus 5x is negative 3x. We bring down our equal sign. 5x minus 5x is 0 because those are additive inverses, so we've canceled that out. And what we have left on the right side is negative 30. Now we have negative 3 times x is equal to negative 30. So to solve for x, we need to do the opposite of multiplying by a negative 3, which is dividing both sides by a negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1. And 1 times x is just x. So we have x equals negative 30 divided by negative 3. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. And 30 divided by 3 is 10. So x equals 10, which is answer choice A. In the following inequality, solve for x. Negative 4x plus 8 is greater than or equal to 48. To solve for x, we need to get x alone, which means undoing the operations that are being done to x currently. And that is negative 4 times x and plus 8. So we'll start by getting rid of the plus 8. And we can get rid of it by doing the exact opposite of adding 8, subtracting 8. And if we subtract 8 from the left side of our inequality symbol, then we must also subtract 8 from the right side to keep it even. So we bring down our negative 4x. A positive 8 minus 8 is 0, is greater than or equal to 48 minus 8 is 40. And we're almost done. Now we need to undo negative 4 times x. And the opposite of multiplying by a negative 4 is dividing by a negative 4. Now with inequalities, there is a special rule you have to remember. And that is, if you divide both sides by a negative number, or you multiply both sides by a negative number, you have to flip the sign. So now instead of greater than or equal to, our sign is now a less than or equal to sign. And again, that's because we divided both sides by a negative number. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1, and 1 times x is x. 40 divided by negative 4, a positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 40 divided by 4 is 10. So x is less than or equal to negative 10. Answer D. The expressions y equals negative 3x plus 6 and y equals 2x minus 4 represent straight lines. Compute the coordinates of the point at which they intersect. This can be done by substituting 2x minus 4 for y in our other expression, or by substituting negative 3x plus 6 for y in this expression. Either way, the result is 2x minus 4 equals negative 3x plus 6. Now we need to solve for x. First, I'll add 3x to both sides so that I can get all my x variables on one side of the equation. 2x plus 3x is 5x minus 4 equals negative 3x plus 3x cancels, and I'm left with 6 on the right side. Now we need to add 4 to both sides. Bring down the 5x. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0 equals 10. And finally, we need to divide both sides by 5 to solve for x. 5 divided by 5 is 1, times x is x, and that equals 10 divided by 5, which is 2. We're halfway there now. We've found what x is. To find y, we need to substitute 2 for x in either one of these expressions. And I'm going to use the second one. Since x is 2, we need to replace x with 2 to find y. So y equals 2 times 2 minus 4. Y equals 2 times 2 is 4 minus 4. So y equals 0. Our ordered pair is 2, 0. And you can always check this by plugging this ordered pair back into both of your expressions, and you should get a true mathematical equation there when you do that. And if you didn't, then you know that you've made an error somewhere in your work. Simplify the following expression. 16x cubed minus 32x squared plus 8x, all divided by 4x. We need to divide each one of these terms by 4x. So the first thing I'm going to do is rewrite this as 3 separate fractions. And now we can simplify. 16 divided by 4 is 4. X cubed divided by x is x squared. Because when you divide, you subtract the exponents. 3 minus 1 is 2. Minus 32 divided by 4 is 8. X squared divided by x, 2 minus 1, is x to the first, plus 8 divided by 4 is 2, and x divided by x, or x to the first divided by x to the first, 1 minus 1 is 0, or you can just think x, or anything really, divided by itself is 1. So x divided by itself is 1, and 1 times 2 is 2. So our answer is C. Factor the following expression. 9x squared y minus 18xy minus 27y. The first thing we need to do when factoring is to look and see if there's a GCF for our terms. So I'm going to write down our terms: 9x squared y, 18xy, and 27y. And then I'm going to factor them to see if I can find a GCF. The prime factorization of 9 is 3 times 3, and then x squared, so that's times x, and then times y. So that is the prime factorization of this term. 18 is 2 times 9, and 9 is 3 times 3, times x times y. 27 is 3 times 9, and 9 is 3 times 3, times y. Now to find the GCF, we look for what all 3 of our terms have in common. All 3 of our terms have a 3 in common. All 3 of our terms have another 3 in common. And all 3 of our terms have a y in common. So the GCF is 3 times 3 times y, 9y. Now we can factor out the GCF. So we're going to factor out a 9y from each one of our terms. 9y times x squared would be 9x squared y. 9y times negative 2x would be negative 18xy. And 9y times negative 3 would be negative 27y. Now we need to look and see if we can factor this trinomial. So bring down the 9y. And if this trinomial can be factored, we're going to factor it into two binomials. Well, I know that I'm going to have x and x as my first term in each set of parentheses, because x times x is x squared. Now the numbers that go here have to multiply to give me negative 3 and add to give me negative 2. So we need numbers that, we need the factors of negative 3 that have a sum of negative 2. Put that in parentheses. The factors of negative 3 that have a sum of negative 2. And the only factors of negative 3 that would have a sum of negative 2 would be negative 3 and positive 1. So negative 3 and positive 1. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, and negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. And we can always FOIL it out to see if it does, in fact, we did factor correctly. So x times x would give us our x squared. X times 1 is 1x. Minus 3x would be negative 2x. And then negative 3 times 1 would be negative 3. So this is our factored answer, which is answer choice C. Which of the following could be a graph of the function y equals 1 divided by x? Let's start with B. This is a linear function. In fact, it even looks like the parent function of a linear function, which is y equals x. So not y equals 1 divided by x. By the way, this is called a rational function. The root ratio means a comparison of two numbers, or a fraction. And B is not the graph of a rational function. It's the graph of a linear function. C is a quadratic function graph. This parabola is graphed from a quadratic function. And this also looks like the parent form. The parent form of a quadratic function is y equals x squared. So this would also not be the graph of a rational function. On D, this is what an exponential function looks like. It starts out increasing slowly, but then it begins increasing faster. And that parent function is y equals a number to the x value, or b to the x. That's not the parent function, that's just the form. And it's actually y equals a times b to the x. But again, not a rational function. And then, so we can eliminate D. And then on E, this is very similar to B. It's another linear function. It graphs a line. And it's not the parent function this time, but it's still a linear function. So it's in this form, y equals mx plus b. So still, with a linear function, our x is not in the denominator like our rational function. So that one's out as well. Which means we're left with A, which is the graph of a rational function. Something you can think about with rational functions is that the only number you can't divide by is 0. Notice how on this graph, your domain is never 0. On this side of our graph, it's approaching 0 and then it turns down sharply away from 0. because your x value can never be 0, since you cannot divide by 0. It's the same thing in the first quadrant. Again, it's approaching 0 and then it turns sharply away from 0 because x can never be 0. Your y value will also never be 0. So again, you can tell in this graph our y value never reaches 0. However, in all of these other graphs, we do have an x value of 0. There it is, right there. Right there, our x value of 0. And so that's another way to tell that A is the solution. A is the graph of the function y equals 1 divided by x. Determine the midpoint of the line shown in the figure. We will use the midpoint formula to find the midpoint of this line. The midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So what you're doing is you're adding your two x coordinates together from the two endpoints and dividing that sum by 2, basically finding the average of the x values, which would be the middle of the x values, and then doing the same with your y coordinates of your two endpoints. You'll add those together and then divide that sum by 2. Again, finding the average of those y coordinates, or the middle of the y coordinates. So when you find the middle x coordinate and the middle y coordinate, you'll then have the coordinates of the midpoint. But first we need to know the coordinates of our endpoints. So this endpoint is at negative 1, 2, 3, 4, positive 1, 2, 3, 4. So these coordinates are negative 4, 4 for this endpoint. And this endpoint is at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 2. These are my x1, y1, x2, y2 coordinates. And it doesn't matter which one you label as your x1, y1, as long as you label them consistently. For instance, this could not be my x2, y1. Since this is my x2 coordinate, that means this is my y2 coordinate. Those subscripts, the 1s and the 2s, all that means is this is the first point, this is the second point. But it really doesn't matter which point is your first and which point is your second. So I just usually label them from left to right. And now all we need to do is substitute and solve. So the midpoint is x1 plus x2, so negative 4 plus 6 divided by 2. And then y1 plus y2, 4 plus negative 2 divided by 2. Now we need to simplify by adding. Negative 4 plus 6 is 2 divided by 2. 4 plus negative 2 is 2 divided by 2. And finally we divide. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So the midpoint is 1, 1, which you can see on this graph, over 1, up 1. And you know that point does look like it's right in the middle of that line. So that's our midpoint. 7m plus 43 equals 160. What is the value of m? So first I'm going to rewrite my equation. 7m plus 43 equals 160. We want to know what number multiplied times 7 with 43 added to that would give us 160. And we could guess and check numbers until we found a number that would satisfy this equation. But there's a much easier and more direct way. And that is to undo the operations that are done to our variable m. We're going to start by undoing the addition of 43. So we're going to subtract 43 from both sides. And as long as we do that to both sides, we keep our equation equal and balanced. If you have something that's equal to something else, and you take away the same amount from both of those things, then they'll still be equal to each other. So we bring down the 7m. Positive 43 minus 43 is 0, so those cancel. And we bring down the equals, and then we have to subtract. And I can't take 3 from 0, so I'll borrow from the 6, that's a 5. Then I have 10 minus 3 is 7, 5 minus 4 is 1, and I bring down my 1 because 1 minus 0 is 1, so 117. Now I have to undo this 7 times m, and the opposite of multiplying times 7 is dividing by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 1 times m is m. 117 divided by 7, I'm not sure what that is, so I'm going to divide off to the side. 7 goes into 11 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. When you subtract, you get 4. And then we bring down the 7. 7 goes into 47 6 times. 7 times 6 is 42. We subtract and we get 5. Then we add a decimal and a 0 and bring it down. 7 goes into 50 7 times. 7 times 7 is 49. We subtract and we get 1. We add a 0 and bring it down. 7 goes into 10 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. We subtract and we get 3. And we could keep going, but really that's all I need to find my answer. The 1 tells the 7 to stay the same if we're rounding to the tenths place, so our answer is 16 and 7/10, which is answer choice B. Simplify the following expression. The quantity 2x squared plus 3 times the quantity 2x minus 1. To simplify, we need to FOIL. The F in FOIL stands for first. So we're going to take the first term in our first binomial and multiply it times the first term in our second binomial. First and first. 2x squared times 2x. 2 times 2 is 4. X squared times x is x cubed. Next we do O, which stands for outer. So those are the two terms on the outside, which would be 2x squared and negative 1. So 2x squared times a negative 1 is negative 2x squared. Then our inner terms are the two terms on the inside, 3 times 2x, which is a positive 6x. And then finally, our last terms. So the last term in the first set of parentheses and the last term in the second set of parentheses. 3 times negative 1, which is negative 3. Then we'd want to look and see if we had any like terms to combine. And we don't. We have a cubic x term, a squared x term, an x term, and then just a constant. So that's our answer, which matches answer choice A. A tire on a car rotates 500 RPM, or revolutions per minute, when the car is traveling at 50 kilometers per hour. what is the circumference of the tire in meters? Well, the first thing I want to do is take this 50 kilometers per hour and convert it into meters, since that's what they want the circumference in. So to convert kilometers to meters, I multiply it by the conversion factor of 1,000 meters is 1 kilometer. And when I multiply these fractions, I can cross-cancel these units, kilometers, and I'll be left with meters per hour. And I'll go ahead and do that first. So our kilometers cross-cancel. 50 times 1,000 is 50,000 meters per 1 hour. So every hour, this car goes 50,000 meters. And we know that it goes 500 revolutions every minute. So then I want to convert my 50,000 meters per hour into meters per minute so I can more easily compare it to my revolutions per minute. So I'll multiply it by the conversion factor of 1 hour is 60 minutes. So again, my hours cross cancel since I'm multiplying fractions, and I get 50,000 meters every 60 minutes. What I want to find, though, is what 1 revolution is. How many meters is 1 revolution? Because 1 revolution is 1 time all the way around the tire. And that would be the circumference, which is what they're asking me for. So I'm going to take this 50,000 meters per 60 minutes and multiply it times my 500 revolutions per minute. So every 1 minute, the car goes 500 revolutions. So that again, my minutes, these units, minutes cross cancel. And I can cross cancel my 50,000 and my 500 by dividing them both by 500. And 500 divided by 500 is 1. And 50,000 divided by 500 is 100. So then 100 meters times 1 is 100 meters divided by 60 revolutions. So now I found that every 100 meters, this car, it's going 60 revolutions every 100 meters, which I can then simplify by canceling out the zeros, and I get 10/6 meters per revolution. So it goes 10/6 of a meter every revolution. And again, a revolution is 1 time all the way around the wheel, which is the circumference. So our circumference is 10/6. If 25% of x is 250, what is the value of x? We're going to start by decoding this sentence. We're going to translate it into a math equation. It says 25% of x. And this word of tells us to multiply. So I'm going to put a little multiplication dot above it. So we're going to multiply 25% and x. Is a very important word in math because is an equal sign. So wherever you see that word is, you can put an equal sign there. And now we can take this and write our equation. So 25% times x, we have to take our percent and change it into a decimal. So 25%, the decimal's behind it, and you move it 2 places to the left to change a percent into a decimal. So that's 25 hundredths times x, or just 25 hundredths x, is or equals 250. Now that we've written our equation, we just need to solve. So this is 25 hundredths times x. To solve for x, we do the opposite of multiplying, and we divide both sides by 25 hundredths. So 25 hundredths divided by 25 hundredths is 1, and 1 times x is simply x. So those cancel out. We bring down the equal sign, and if you have a calculator, of course you can divide that in a calculator, but I'm going to work it out off to the side. So we have 250 divided by 25 hundredths. We can't divide by a decimal, so we need to move the decimal 2 places to the right, which means we do the same with our number under our division sign. So we have to add 2 zeros to it. And now we can divide. 25 goes into 25 one time. 25 times 1 is 25, and we subtract and get 0. We bring down a 0, and 25 goes into 0 times. And that's going to keep happening for each one of these zeros. We're going to keep bringing down zeros, and we're going to keep getting zeros. So we end up with x is 1,000. Now, if that's a little confusing to you, you can do it one other way. So you can rewrite this as 250 divided by, and then 25 hundredths is 1/4. So it's 250 divided by 1/4, which still might look a little confusing, but we can even rewrite that to 250 divided by 1/4. And then we can copy, change, flip. We can copy 250, change division to multiplication, and flip 1/4 to be 4. 250 times 4 is 1,000, which is the same thing we got when we divided with our decimal. So either way, the answer is 1,000. And if you put that back into the sentence, it makes sense. 25% of 1,000 is 250. Jesse invests $7,000 in a certificate of deposit that pays interest at the rate of 7.5% annually. How much interest in dollars does Jesse gain from this investment during the first year that he holds the certificate? This is a great problem to use this formula on. And some people call it IPERT, just as a way to remember it. The I stands for the interest, the amount of interest in dollars, like what we're trying to find. P stands for principal, or the amount that's being invested initially. That would be our $7,000. The R is the rate, or the percentage, but written as a decimal. So we're going to take 7.5% and write it as a decimal. And that'll be our rate. And then T stands for time. So you may want to make a note of that. This I is the interest. P is the principal. R is the rate as a decimal. And the T is the time. So we're going to take our information from our problem and plug it in. So our amount of interest is equal to the principal, $7,000, times the rate as a decimal again. So we're taking 7.5% and changing it to a decimal, which means taking the decimal and moving it 2 places to the left. So we add that 0, so it's 75 thousandths and then times the year, or the time, and we're just trying to find out about the first year. So that means it's been in there for 1 year, and then we just need to multiply those things together. So 1 times anything is just that, so I can really kind of ignore that. So I just need to multiply these two numbers together. So I have this 75 thousandths, and I'm going to put it on top because it's very easy to multiply times 7,000, since the first thing I'm going to do is just write down those 3 zeros. And then the only number I really have to multiply by is the 7. So 7 times 5 is 35. Write the 5, carry the 3. 7 times 7 is 49, plus 3 is 52. And then we have 3 numbers behind the decimal, so 3 numbers behind the decimal. And that means that he's going to make $525 off of his investment. So that's the number you would need to bubble in, is 525. Simplify 9x times the quantity 3x squared plus 2x minus 9. To simplify, we need to distribute the 9x to all the terms inside the parentheses. And what that means is we have to multiply. So we multiply first 9x times 3x squared. 9 times 3 is 27. X times x squared is x cubed. Plus 9x times 2x, 9 times 2 is 18. X times x is x squared. Minus 9x times 9. 9 times 9 is 81. X. And that would be answer choice B. 27x cubed plus 18x squared minus 81x. So remember that when you multiply x times x squared, you're adding the exponents, and that's where the x cubed comes from. X times x, again, you're adding those exponents, and those have an imaginary exponent of a 1, both of them. So x to the first times x to the first is x squared. You add the exponents, 1 plus 1. And then 9x times 9 is 81x, or negative 81x because of the minus in front of the 9. Which of the following expressions is equivalent to x cubed times x to the 5th? First of all, we need to recognize that when you have 2 letters or a number and a letter next to each other with no operation symbols in between them, meaning there's no addition sign, subtraction, division, it is always understood that without any of those other operation signs, that we are multiplying these together. So this is x cubed times x to the 5th. And an exponent simply tells you how many times to multiply the base times itself. So x cubed means we're multiplying x times itself 3 times. And then we're multiplying that times x to the 5th, which is x times itself 5 times. So really, we're multiplying x times itself a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. So x cubed times x to the 5th is the same as x to the 8th. Now there is a rule for this so that you don't have to go through this step every time. And the rule is when you multiply with the same bases, the base being, like in this case, x, then you simply add the exponents together. So 3 plus 5 is 8, so it's x to the 8th. which is answer choice D. Elijah drove 45 miles to his job in an hour and 10 minutes in the morning. On the way home, however, traffic was much heavier, and the same trip took an hour and a half. What was his average speed in miles per hour for the round trip? So first, let's determine just how far Elijah went. It was 45 miles to his job, and then he had to drive 45 miles back home. So he drove that 45 miles twice, or 90 miles. Speed is calculated by dividing your distance by your time. So we've got his total distance. Now we need to find his total time. It says it took him an hour and 10 minutes to get to his job. So 1 hour and 10 minutes is a total of 60 minutes plus 10 minutes, 70 minutes. Then on the way home, it took him an hour and a half. So 1 hour, 30 minutes. Again, an hour is 60 minutes plus 30 minutes means a total of 90 minutes. And I'm converting the time into minutes just because it makes those units easier to work with. When you've got hours and minutes together, it's easier just to bring them all into minutes, put them all in that same unit of minutes. So 70 plus 90 is 160 minutes for his total travel time. So again, to calculate his speed, we need to divide his total distance by his total time. So 90 miles divided by 160 minutes. Well, the first thing I could do to simplify this is I could cancel a 0. So now it's just 9 divided by 16, which will be a lot easier to work with. So I have 9 divided by 16. 16 doesn't go into 9 at all. That's 0, which means I'm going to need to add a decimal and a 0. 16 goes into 90 5 times. So 16 times 5. 5 times 6 is 30. Carry the 3. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 3 is 8. So that's 80. We subtract and we get 10. So we need to add another 0 and bring it down. So 16 goes into 100 6 times. Since it went into 16 times 5 was 80, then one more time would be 96. And then we subtract and we get 4. Add another 0, bring it down. 16 goes into 40 2 times. 16 times 2 is 32. So we subtract and we get 8. Add another 0, bring it down. And 16 goes into 80 5 times. 16 times 5 is 80. We subtract and get 0. So that means that his speed in miles per minute would be 0.5625. But they didn't ask us for his speed in miles per minute. They asked us for his average speed in miles per hour. So now I have to convert this speed into miles per hour by multiplying it by 60, since there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. So if he travels this speed every minute, then we multiply by 60 to find the speed in miles per hour. So first start with your 0 placeholder. 6 times 5 is 30, so that's 0, carry the 3. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 3 is 15. 6 times, put that in the wrong place, oops. 6 times 6 is 36, plus 1 is 7, carry the 3. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 3 is 33. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers behind the decimal. So your answer should have 4 numbers behind the decimal. So it's 33 and 75/100 miles per hour, which is the same as 33 and 3/4 miles per hour, since 3/4 and 75/100 are equal. Francine can ride 16 miles on her bicycle in 45 minutes. At this speed, how many minutes would it take Francine to ride 60 miles? This problem is a good candidate for using a proportion to solve. There's more than one way to solve it, but I like proportion, so I'm going to use a proportion. First, I know that Francine can go 16 miles in 45 minutes. That's going to be my first ratio. So I have 16 miles in 45 minutes. And the key to setting up a successful proportion is to be consistent. So since our first ratio, we have miles to minutes, then our second ratio will also be miles to minutes. So they want to know how many minutes it would take Francine to ride 60 miles. So my miles is 60, and my minutes is what I'm trying to find, so that's where I'll put a variable. To solve a proportion, we cross multiply. 16 times x is 16x, and that equals 60 times 45. 0. 6 times 5 is 30, carry the 3. 6 times 4 is 24, plus 3 is 27. So 2,700. And then we solve for x by dividing both sides by 16. So x equals, and now I need to find out what 2,700 divided by 16 is. 16 goes into 2,700 one time. And that's 16, and we subtract and get 11. Then we bring down our 0. We could use 15 as a compatible number to see how many times 15 would go into 110. So we have 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90, 105. So 7 times. So let's see if 16 will go into 110 7 times. 7 times 6 is 42. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 4 is 11. And that's a little too big, which means I know 16 goes into 110 6 times. So 16 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 3 is 9. And that works. So we need to subtract, and we get 14. Then we bring down our next 0. So we have 140. So I know 16 is going to go into 140 at least 7 times, but it should go even more than that. So let's see what 16 times 8 is. 8 times 6 is 48. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 4 is 12. And that's all we're going to be able to do. So 8 times, and we get 128. And when we subtract those numbers, we get 12. So that means we need to add a decimal and a 0 and bring it down. 16 goes into 120 7 times. 16 times 7, we found earlier, is 112. So we subtract and we get 8. We add another 0 and bring it down. And 16 goes into 80 less than 6 times, and actually exactly 5 times. 16 times 5 is 80. So we subtract and we get a remainder of 0. So that means if it took her 45 minutes to go 16 miles, it should take her 168 and 75/100ths minutes to go 60 miles. And this is the answer you would grid in.